The evening wind in Wyoming swept across Dust Haven Station, as if testing anyone bold enough to step onto this rough stretch of land. Fine gold dust drifted through the sunlight, wrapping around the pale blue hem of Amara Holt's dress as the young black woman from Atlanta stepped down from the long-haul coach. In her hand was a worn letter, its careful handwriting belonging to James Callahan, a man she had never met, yet who had promised marriage in exchange for a home and a new beginning. Hope, small as a seed, had grown in her through every mile from the south to the west. But the moment her boots touched the dry earth, she sensed something was wrong. No one waited for her. No note, no expectant glance from any groom. Only wind along the rails and strangers leading their horses past, until a tired, rough voice rose behind her, the voice of the man who could change her life. "You Amara Holt?" She turned. There stood Caleb Callahan, tall, shirt caught in the wind, eyes dim with the look of someone used to enduring more than speaking. "Yes, I'm here to meet James Callahan." Caleb's gaze slid to the letter in her hand. A heavy silence followed, sharp enough to still the wind. "James is dead." 3 words cut through the station like a slow blade. Amara froze. Even her heartbeat seemed to falter. All the way here, she had imagined a decent man, a roof, a future. Now there was nothing but emptiness. Caleb drew a long breath, then lifted her worn valise without waiting for permission and tossed it onto the waiting wagon. "Come on." She startled. "Go? Where?" "To the ranch. You don't have anywhere else, do you?" His voice was coarse, impatient, yet the gray eyes under his hat held no cruelty, only fatigue, the kind carried by someone forced to shoulder more than he could bear. Amara wanted to object, but Caleb was already climbing onto the driver's seat, reins in hand. She had no choice but to follow. The wagon rolled down the dirt road, carrying her away from the station, the place she had hoped would begin her new life, but had instead delivered a single, fateful mistake. Callahan Ranch appeared after nearly an hour. Wide, worn, its gray roof long, and the smell of dry grass drifting through the air. Caleb hopped down first, but as Amara followed, her foot slipped on the step from fatigue and dust. In a quick reflex, Caleb reached out and caught her arm. A light touch, but enough to make them both pause. He pulled away as if burned, frowning. "Watch your step." "Sorry," she murmured, unsure if she was apologizing for the stumble or the sudden closeness. Caleb opened the door, letting her into the cold wooden house. "Stay here tonight. We'll sort things out in the morning." Amara nodded. There was nowhere else to go. Night fell fast in Wyoming. Sitting by the window of the spare room, moonlight washed over her skin as wolves howled across the distance, their calls long and sharp. She stepped onto the porch, arms wrapped around herself for warmth. Grass rustled underfoot, darkness stretching without end. This land was wild, fierce, nothing like the life she had known. A soft footstep broke the silence. Caleb emerged from the dark, shoulders dusted from work, gray eyes catching the moon. "Don't stand out here alone," he said quietly, voice low as wind. "Wolves are thick tonight. Stay close to me." Amara lifted her gaze. For the first time, his eyes held no coldness, only something that looked almost like concern. And in that moment, she knew her new life had begun. That night, the wolves' cries were no longer distant sounds rolling over the ridge. They came closer, far closer, as if the darkness itself was breaking open and running toward the ranch. Amara had barely lain down on the hard bed when the cattle erupted in panic. Her door swung wide. Caleb stood there with a hunting rifle in hand, his eyes drawn tight like a bowstring. "Wolves are in the pen. Stay." But Amara had already run after him before the unfinished words could fall. When the barn door burst open, the scent of dry hay, fear, and the scrape of claws collided in the dark. A gray wolf snarled, its eyes flaring in the lamplight. The cattle pressed into a corner, stamping over each other in terror. "Back up!" Caleb barked, yet Amara stayed at his side. Her hands trembled too much to lift the rifle steady, but she did not step back. Not once. Caleb shot her a quick look, surprise flickering there. Then he shifted, placing half his body between her and the danger. For a brief second, their breaths met, heat and cold mixing under the wavering oil lamp. She caught the scent of pine on his shirt, the harsh rhythm of his breathing as he shouted at the wolves, and the firm tension in the arm shielding her. 2 gunshots cracked through the night. The wolves fled, their shadows swallowed by the dark. When the gate was locked again, Caleb turned, seized her by the shoulders, and pulled her into the light. "Are you hurt? I told you to stay inside." Amara's breath shook, her heart racing. "If this is home, then I have to help protect it." Caleb held quiet for a long moment. Something softer stirred in his eyes, no longer surprise but a muted respect. "All right," he said quietly. "Thank you." That evening, with the last light clinging to the ridge, Caleb tightened the saddle on his horse. The herd was gathered on the southern range, ready for the long cattle drive to Cheyenne. He looked at Amara longer than necessary, as if he wanted to say something but held it back. "I'll be gone about 6 days," he said, voice low and rough. "Jake, Miguel, and Tommy are going with me. You, stay safe." Amara nodded. "You too." He held her gaze for one more beat before mounting his horse. The cowboys moved out, the jingle of spurs fading as they disappeared beyond the hills. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, Amara remained at the ranch alone. The next morning, she chose to check the eastern pasture herself, not to prove anything, but because she felt she should. She borrowed a brown gelding named Copper and rode across the field alone. The early wind was cool, the sun rising over the hills, and for the first time in weeks, the land felt calm. But in a low patch of ground, a snap of branches behind her made Amara turn. A lean wolf, smaller than the night before, but still fierce, stood only yards away. Copper shrieked. Amara's hands shook, but this time she did not wait to be saved. She pulled the trigger and fired a warning shot into the air. The sound rolled across the plain, and the wolf wheeled and vanished into the brush. But as she exhaled, Copper's front leg dropped into a sinkhole. The ground sagged, and the gelding collapsed into a burrow. "No, don't! Come on!" Amara knelt to check him. The leg was swollen, not broken, but useless. The ranch was far, and the sky was turning dark. She took the reins and tugged gently. "Let's go home, Copper. We'll walk together." 2 miles in the night. Her feet burned in stiff leather boots. Her shoulders throbbed. Her fingers ached. The wind clawed at her skin, and fear lingered behind her like a shadow refusing to leave. But she kept walking, one step, then another. When she finally saw the dim glow of the barn lantern, tears slid down her face. From pain, exhaustion, or relief, she could not tell. She tended Copper with care before staggering to her bed. Morning came with a knock. Eleanor Price, the kind widow from town, stood on the porch with a large basket of food. "Good heavens, you look worse than I expected," she said, as Amara limped down the steps. "I heard you went to check the pasture alone? Wolves? A lame horse? What were you thinking, child? Amara gave a tired smile. I just wanted to help. Mrs. Price set a hand on her shoulder, her gaze stern yet gentle. You're not temporary. She spoke slowly, each word meant to settle deep. You look like someone who belongs here. The words drifted into Amara's chest like warm wind. That afternoon, as the soreness eased, Amara sat alone on the porch. Her palms were blistered, the bandages stained with dust and sweat. Yet the sunset was breathtaking. Streaks of purple, amber, and gold folding over the distant ridge. For the first time since stepping onto Wyoming soil, Amara felt something strange. If she could stay brave, stay steady, this place might become home. And in that last light, the belief rose, small but strong, like a seed breaking through dry stone. 6 days later, as the sun dropped behind the hills and the evening light spilled a copper glow across the grasslands, Amara heard the first distant sounds. Tired lowing, then men's laughter, the click of spurs, a pulse of life the ranch had gone without for a week. She set the basket of beans aside and hurried into the yard, drawn as if by something unseen. The cowboys emerged through a haze of dust, riding in a loose line, coats dulled by the trail and reins hanging easy in their hands. Miguel whistled when he spotted her. Tommy lifted his hat high. Jake only gave a rare, small smile, but Amara saw only one man: Caleb. He rode the familiar black horse, shoulders broad, back straight, his figure caught in the last wash of color. When his eyes found her, he jerked the reins lightly as if his heart had stumbled. Then he swung down, without waiting for the horse to stop, and to the shock of everyone, he pulled her straight into his arms. His grip was so tight Amara could hear his heartbeat pounding against her ear. She didn't think, didn't breathe. The smell of sun and wind on his shirt made her eyes burn. You all right? Caleb asked, his voice raw, as if scraped thin. I'm all right, Amara exhaled. And you? He stepped back half a pace, his gray eyes holding hers longer than they should. Then, as if something broke loose inside him, Caleb leaned in, and his mouth touched hers. A kiss so light it felt like wind passing. But because it was so light, so unexpected, both of them froze. Amara opened her eyes first and saw the stunned look on his face, as if he hadn't meant for it to happen. He straightened fast, drawing in a sharp breath like someone coming up from deep water. Miguel gave a long whistle. Tommy fell right off his saddle. Jake turned away, pretending to fix his reins. Caleb coughed, flustered. We got a good price. Amara laughed so hard she had to cover her mouth. Dinner that night was loud with stories. Miguel recounted trail trouble. Tommy tried to talk over Jake, and Caleb sat quiet, but kept glancing at Amara as if afraid she might vanish. When the cowboys finally headed to the bunkhouse, the kitchen grew still, warm, and dim. Caleb set a heavy leather pouch on the table. Good sale. Better than we hoped. Enough to make this mortgage payment. Amara let out a soft breath. That's good. Yeah, he said, though his eyes didn't match the relief in his voice. He hesitated, then added, Jake heard something in Cheyenne. Piton's trying to buy our loan from the bank. If he gets it, he can force a sale. Silence settled. Amara tightened her hand under the table. This ranch is our home. We won't let him take it. Caleb looked at her. For a long time. A strange look. Like he was trying to remember when he first started thinking in terms of we. They counted the money together under the oil lamp, The trembling gold light softened their faces, drew them closer. Each time Amara's hand brushed Caleb's as they stacked the bills, her heart gave a small, sharp jump, unfamiliar, yet right. Caleb felt it too. His fingers paused each time they touched, pulling back more slowly than he wanted to admit. Neither spoke, but everything between them, breath, heartbeat, closeness, had shifted. When the last stack was placed down, Caleb looked up. The lamplight sparked in his eyes, a stubborn glint. Amara. Yes? He swallowed, his whole body drawn tight like an over-pulled rope. Then he said it. Low, steady, unprepared. Marry me. Amara went still. Caleb rushed on, fast, like someone afraid courage might slip. As soon as we can. Tomorrow, if you want. In the long, suspended silence, Amara could hear her own heartbeat. Change. And she knew nothing between them would ever be the same again. News of their wedding spread fast. Perhaps in a small town like Dusthaven, everything spread fast. But it might also be because Caleb Callahan, a man as silent as stone, had never once set foot in the church to schedule a wedding. And Amara Holt, the black woman from Atlanta, stood beside him as if they had belonged to each other long before they met. The wedding was rushed, with only 2 days to prepare. Yet the sky over Dusthaven that morning was strangely clear, as if making way for something new. The small wooden church glimmered under sunlight through its old stained glass panes. More townsfolk came than Caleb expected. Mrs. Price brought a basket of pastries. Young Tommy from the neighboring ranch tucked wildflowers onto each bench. Everyone smiled, not out of curiosity, but genuine gladness. Amara stood in the tiny room behind the church, smoothing the blue silk dress she had carried all the way from Atlanta. It was old, worn in places, but when she put it on, it made her brown skin glow under the morning light. Mrs. Price looked at her and sighed in a soft, affectionate way. You're lovelier than any bride Dusthaven has ever had. Amara gave a small smile. I just hope I won't make Caleb ashamed. Him? Mrs. Price crossed her arms. If Caleb is still standing today, that's already a miracle. The boy didn't sleep a wink last night. Amara flushed. Her heart beat harder than usual. When the church doors opened, the whole room seemed to hold its breath. Caleb stood at the end of the aisle, wearing a clean white shirt, a rare sight, his hair combed, the dark vest fitting squarely across his broad shoulders. But it was his eyes that made Amara stop mid-step. That look, reverent to the point of overwhelming. Not fiery, but the kind of reverence a man gives to something he is willing to guard with his whole life. Amara moved closer. Caleb lifted his hand, trembling just slightly. She placed hers into it. In that instant, the world shrank to a single breath. The minister began the vows, but Caleb barely heard a word. He watched only the deep, steady calm in Amara's eyes. When the moment came for him to adjust the veil on her hair, his hand brushed the side of her neck. Unintentional, yet enough to pull the breath from both of them. Her skin was warm under his fingertips, and its softness made Caleb swallow hard. We are ready, he murmured, not sure whether he spoke to the minister or to himself. Then came the words, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb leaned in. This kiss was nothing like the one in the ranch yard. No hesitation, no surprise. It was deeper, steadier, filled with the certainty of a man who knew the worth of what he held. Amara felt her knees almost give way. Outside, the townsfolk erupted in applause. Mrs. Callahan! Someone shouted. The crowd echoed it, cheerful and loud, so genuine that Amara laughed through her burning cheeks. Mrs. Price hugged her. "Congratulations, sweetheart." For the first time, Amara felt completely accepted, not as a newcomer, not as a misplaced bride, but as someone who belonged here. That night, when they reached the ranch, both were exhausted from the long day. Caleb closed the door gently. Amara sat on the edge of the bed, slipping off her old wedding shoes, too flustered to know where to look. Caleb stood still for a moment, hands in his pockets, as if fighting something inside himself. Then he walked over and sat beside her, close enough for their breaths to mingle. "Amara." His voice was low, drawn from deep inside. "We have a whole lifetime to take it slow." She lifted her gaze. Caleb's eyes softened, in a way meant for her alone. He touched her cheek lightly. Not a kiss. Not a rush, just a touch. Enough to make the air between them heavy. They did nothing more that night. They simply sat together for a long time, listening to the wind slide past the window, hearing their hearts shift into a new rhythm. And in that quiet, a gentle truth settled. They already belonged to each other. Long before the wedding night even began. That morning, Dust Haven was unusually lively. On Main Street, wagons passed more often, and men gathered outside the blacksmith shop, trading rumors that the railroad was trying to buy up surrounding land to expand its line. Caleb and Amara stepped down from their wagon in front of the bank. He rested a light hand on his wife's elbow as they climbed the steps, a small gesture, firm enough to feel like he was shielding her from the hard western sun. They entered. The bank smelled of worn leather and old paper, its walls bright in the morning light. Mr. Alden, the bank manager, looked up in mild surprise. "Well now, Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, you're here early." Amara greeted him with the calm, precise tone of the schoolteacher she once was. Round vowels, steady pitch, the kind of voice that made people straighten their backs without knowing why. "We'd like to make this month's mortgage payment and confirm the terms." Caleb glanced at her, one brow rising. He had never heard her use that voice before. Something stirred in his chest, half pride, half the kind of shock only a man can feel when his wife suddenly reveals a new formidable edge. Mr. Alden flipped through his ledger. "Everything remains the same, but the railroad sent an offer to buy overdue loans to ease negotiation on land purchases." "That's why we came early," Amara said, her voice smooth as running water. She placed the stack of money, earned from the cattle drive, on the counter. Her hand trembled faintly, but her voice did not. "Mr. Alden, you know the Callahan Ranch hasn't missed a payment since winter. We pay on time, consistently, and we can continue. The railroad doesn't want to help the bank. They want leverage to force us off our land." Caleb turned toward her. The way she stood, straight, steady, her gaze respectful yet unyielding, made his heartbeat slip. Amara continued, each word firm but graceful. "Dust Haven's dignity is its land and its right to speak for itself. If the railroad wants our property, they should speak to us openly, not scheme through our mortgage." Mr. Alden paused. Then he shut the ledger with a decisive thump. "You're right. I'll refuse the railroad. The Callahan mortgage stays with Dust Haven Bank." Caleb exhaled, long and quiet, relief and pride mixing so strongly he had to turn away for a second to hide the softness in his eyes. While they signed the papers, Caleb stood just behind her, leaning slightly to watch her write. A strand of hair had slipped against her neck. He adjusted it without thinking. His fingertips brushed the line of her hair and her skin. So lightly, it felt like a touch that might vanish if the wind rose. Amara stilled. Caleb tried to pull back, but the warmth of her skin under his fingers made him swallow hard, something tightening inside his chest. They stepped out into the street with a brief sense of triumph. But Piton was waiting. Black suit, wide hat, and that tilted smile of a man who knew exactly how to ruin someone's good day. "Congratulations, Callahan," Piton drawled. "Heard the bank refused the railroad. Bold move." Caleb's jaw tightened, his eyes sharp as a blade. "Move aside." Piton shrugged, flicking ash from his cigarette. "Just reminding you, accidents happen. Horses stumble in holes, houses burn, people go missing. Land like yours, plenty of folks would kill to get it." Caleb surged forward, half a step from striking. Tommy jumped at the blacksmith's door, and two other men braced to intervene. But Amara's hand closed around Caleb's, a small touch, barely any force, yet strong enough to pull him back to himself. Caleb stopped as if a hand had caught him straight in the chest. Amara spoke softly. "Not here. Not like this." Caleb looked down at her hand around his. That tiny touch hit harder than any punch. He drew a breath, wrestling himself still. Piton smirked and walked off, cigarette smoke trailing him like the trace of a predator fading into brush. The road back to the ranch was long and quiet. The sunset draped the plains in copper red, the wind carrying the scent of dust and earth. Caleb said nothing. Amara said nothing. But something tightened between them, warm, compressed, stretched thin like a rope drawn close to snapping. Each time the wagon jolted, their shoulders brushed, just barely, but enough to make Caleb grip the reins harder, and Amara turn her face away so he wouldn't see the heat rising in her cheeks. When the ranch appeared in the last red light of the day, both of them knew this silence would break soon. That evening, the Callahan Ranch lay so quiet that even the wind brushing the shingles could be heard. The moon hung low, as if trying to read every tight breath held inside the wooden house. Caleb stayed in the barn longer than usual. Amara knew he was avoiding something. She waited for him on the porch. When he stepped up the wooden stairs, his tall frame cast over her, and they both paused, held still by the weight of everything unsaid. "Are you angry?" Amara asked, her voice low and calm. Caleb shook his head, though his eyes said the opposite. "Not angry, it's—" He bit lightly on his lower lip, searching for words. "It's that I'm scared." Amara frowned gently. "Scared of what?" He turned away, hands curling at his sides as if trying to hide the slight tremor in them. "That I'll lose you," he said, each word pulled out of him like something torn from the chest. Amara stood still. All the moments before, his eyes when he heard Piton's threat, the way he lunged forward, the way he placed himself in front of her like a shield, suddenly fell into place. It hadn't been temper. It had been fear. She stepped closer. "Caleb," she said softly, "you're not the only one who knows fear." He looked back at her. Amara went on, her voice small but sure. "I've been alone all my life. I don't need someone to protect me, but I need a place to be strong. Beside you, I want to stand with you, not behind you." Caleb froze, as if the words struck deep. Then he moved toward her, slow and deliberate. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs resting warm on her cheeks. "I don't want to make you feel small," he murmured, voice rough, almost breaking. "I'm just not used to having someone I could lose." Their foreheads touched. Breaths mingled. Their hearts settled into the same beat, like something long destined. Inside, the room glowed with the flicker of the oil lamp. The flame cast soft, shifting light across their faces, drawing out every quiet line and shadow. Caleb let his hand slide to the curve of her neck, gentle, careful, charged with feeling. Amara closed her eyes, her breath catching, as if the moment itself had tightened around them. Amara, he whispered, her name a confession. She laid her hand over his. I'm here. That was all he needed. No promises, no perfection. Just those two words to tell him he was no longer alone on this hard piece of land. He leaned in. Their lips met, soft at first, tentative, then deepening slowly, steadily, as if two rivers had finally found one course. Amara's arms slipped around his neck, drawing him closer. Caleb held her by the waist, his hands unsteady, as though he feared breaking something too precious. They did not rush. They did not burn fast. They were simply two souls, tired of the world, finding shelter in each other. Clothes slipped away from shoulders with slow, reverent movements. Nothing hurried, nothing loud. Their breaths rose and fell with the old woods creak and the wind outside the porch. Nothing harsh, nothing wild. Only the honesty of two people meeting deeper than words. Caleb gathered her against him, holding her as if she was the home he had never dared claim. Amara rested her forehead against his shoulder, breath trembling more from emotion than anything else. When they lay down, Caleb held her with the care of someone protecting something fragile and irreplaceable. The night stretched long and soft. Later, as quiet settled, Amara lay on her side, her breathing steady. Caleb had fallen asleep before her, his hand resting lightly on her stomach, as though guarding something delicate, something that wasn't there yet but lived in his hope. Amara looked at that hand and for the first time smiled into the darkness. Outside, the wolves' cries drifted farther away, and the wind softened. Inside that small room, after a night honest down to the bone, two people finally found the place they belonged. The next morning, the early wind drifted over the roof, soft as if it meant to protect the quiet born from the long night before. Amara woke before Caleb. He lay still, his arm draped across her waist, his breath slow and even, like a man who had finally found real sleep. She eased herself away so as not to wake him, but when his arm slipped from her waist, her heart dipped in a strange, unexpected way. While she brewed coffee, the low voices of men outside filtered through the window. Jake, Miguel, and old Earl from the neighboring ranch. Porter's place had trouble last night. All their horses dead in one stall, no bite marks. Just the kind of accident no one believes. Railroads wanted their land for years. Amara's hand stopped, a bead of coffee falling onto the counter. She stepped onto the porch. Tell me more. Jake looked uneasy, scratching the back of his neck. They're saying the barn caught fire, but it rained at midnight. No one buys it. Miguel added, 3 families near the railroad grade had strange trouble this week. Amara stood still. A chill traced her spine, the kind that didn't come from wind, but from instinct. The railroad was pushing. Piton was only a tool. Mrs. Price arrived by noon with a basket of pastries and a look that saw too much. You've heard, haven't you? She asked. Yes, but I don't know what's rumor and what's real. She set the basket on the table. It isn't rumor, Amara. These past weeks, Piton's been meeting certain county men in private. I've seen him pass envelopes. Amara gripped the kitchen cloth tighter. They want the Callahan Ranch. They want everything. Your land sits right in the center of where the line would expand. Later that afternoon, Amara went to check on Copper. Sunlight lay warm along the horses' backs, but her mind swirled with fragments of information clicking into a darker picture. She walked faster, tripping over a metal pail on the ground. It clattered, tilting hard. "Amara!" Caleb reached her in time, pulling her against him before she could fall. Her back pressed to his chest, his breath close to her ear. A flash of intimacy struck, sudden, warm, thickening the air around them. Caleb held her by the waist longer than needed, his hand tightening as if making sure she was truly safe. "You all right?" His voice was low, still trembling with fear. Amara looked up. Their faces were so close she could see every fleck of light in his eyes. "I'm fine. Thanks to you." Caleb leaned down, unthinking, and kissed her. Quick, urgent, the reflex of a man who almost lost something precious. The kiss stole her breath. Caleb startled at himself, but he didn't let her go. In his arms, she felt something shift inside her body. A soft fatigue, a faint dizziness, a wave of nausea she had blamed on poor sleep. Her heart beat hard. Not from the stumble, not from the kiss, but from instinct. A deeply female intuition. By evening, she sat alone on the porch, watching the sun drop behind the mountains. Her hand rested on her stomach, lightly, unconsciously, like touching air. If that intuition was right, if something small was beginning inside her, then they weren't just fighting for land, or a ranch, or their own future. They were fighting for a life no one yet knew about. Caleb walked toward her from afar. He simply looked at her, saying nothing. The last gold light rimmed his tall figure in warmth. Amara swallowed. She wasn't ready to tell him. Not out of fear, just the need to be certain, to let the truth settle before giving him news that could change everything. Caleb sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "Long day?" he asked. Amara turned, offering a small smile. "Yeah, but I'm all right." Caleb studied her for a long moment, eyes half questioning, half tender, as if he sensed something shifting, but couldn't grasp it yet. A gentle breeze passed. The ranch glowed under the orange-red of sunset. In that quiet, Amara slid her hand over her stomach again, no one noticing but her. A small secret, a joy not yet spoken, a hope waiting for its name. At sunrise the next morning, with the mountains still wrapped in violet mist, Amara placed a hand on her stomach. A faint intuition, a life not yet certain, but she set it aside. There was a larger battle ahead. Caleb tightened the saddle straps, his broad shoulders taut in the pale gold light. "We leave early," he said, voice drawn tight as a bowstring. "You're not leaving my side today." Amara nodded, though a different resolve burned in her eyes. Today, she would stand on her own ground. Cheyenne was busier than usual. Word of Piton's influence at the bank had spread fast, yet no one had proof. No one except Amara. Before reaching the bank, she tugged Caleb toward a narrow street where an old boarding house with a red-painted sign stood. Piton had stayed there often during his work trips for the railroad. Caleb frowned. "Amara, what are we doing here?" "I need to meet someone." The bar next door still smelled of last night's whiskey. The moment Amara entered, a young worker, Eddie Collins, dropped his towel and motioned her into the back kitchen. You're Mrs. Callahan, right?" His voice shook. "Yes." Eddie looked around before reaching into his apron and pulling out a folded sheet. Piton, treats everyone here terribly. yelling, threatening. Last night he got drunk. When he pulled out his wallet to pay, something fell out. I picked it up and saw some special expenses. He placed the paper in Amara's hand. A copy of the hotel's logbook page. One line written with careful precision. Special Expenditure Fund. Payment for County Council. Eddie whispered, I think he's been buying people off. I don't know if this helps you, but I want him to lose. Amara squeezed his trembling hand. Thank you. What you did means more than you know. Caleb only watched her, silent, admiration mixed with worry. At the First Bank of Cheyenne, the private meeting room shone bright with morning light. 3 people sat at the table. Bank President Garrison, Caleb, and Amara. Garrison leaned forward, fingers interlaced. Mrs. Callahan, Piton offered a very generous sum if we sell your mortgage to the railroad. Caleb's fist tightened. Amara rested her hand lightly over his. Just a touch, but it made his shoulders drop, as if his breath returned. Amara spoke first. Mr. Garrison, the railroad doesn't want the loan. They want our land, and they're pursuing it through methods a bank should never be tied to. She placed Eddie's paper on the table and slid it forward. This is a copy of Piton's expenditure log. He recorded payments to the county council under a hidden fund. Garrison raised a brow. Where did you get this? People in Cheyenne don't like being treated as fools, Amara said simply. He stared at the paper for a long time. A very long time. Then exhaled. The railroad is pushing too far. I won't be a part of this. The Callahan mortgage stays with First Bank, as usual. Caleb nearly sagged with relief. But the victory barely had time to warm before the bank doors slammed open. Piton stood there. 2 strangers behind him. Long coats, cold eyes. How touching, Piton said. But this is far from over. Amara stood tall, not stepping back. Bribing half the county won't make us sell. Piton's smile thinned. Accidents happen every day on the frontier. Caleb surged forward, but Amara caught his sleeve. A firm, intentional grip. No. One word, and Caleb stopped instantly. Piton faltered, surprised. He hadn't expected their strength to lie right there, in the unity between 2 people who seemed complete opposites. He left, but his shadow stretched behind him like a quiet threat. They rode home as the sun sank behind the pines, washing the plains in burning copper light. Halfway back, Caleb halted his horse and turned to her. How did you stay so calm? Amara didn't look at him. She looked at the horizon. Because I'm not fighting just for myself anymore. Caleb watched her for a long time, long enough for the wind itself to feel still. They rode slow across the field, their shadows stretching side by side, tension still thick, but the air carried something new. They had won a major battle. Piton would return. But this time, they were no longer 2 solitary figures on the Wyoming plain. They were a husband and wife who had just fought their first real fight together, and that was the first victory in the war yet to come. That morning, the Wyoming sky was so blue it felt as though you could hear the earth breathe. Amara stood before the old wooden mirror, both hands resting on her stomach. Just a small change, a feeling too delicate to name. Yet she knew. She sensed it the way one senses the wind. Subtle, soft, but certain. Caleb was out in the yard fixing the fence. Each strike of the hammer fell steady, his broad shoulders shifting with the force of his arm. Every time he lifted his head, The sunlight on his dark brown hair made him look like the most dependable thing her life had ever held. Amara stepped onto the porch. "Caleb," she called. He stopped instantly. In the last 2 days, he had grown alert to every shade in her voice. He set the hammer aside and came to her, gray eyes lined with worry, as if by instinct. "What is it? Are you tired? Dizzy? You barely ate last night." "Caleb." Amara placed her hand on his chest, stopping the rush of concern. She drew a slow breath. "I'm pregnant." Time seemed to halt. Caleb froze as if struck by lightning. His eyes widened. His mouth moved without sound. Then, slowly, his hand rose to cover hers, pressing it over his heart. In that moment, his eyes reddened, and then a tear fell onto the back of her hand. Amara looked up at him, her voice soft. "Are you crying?" Caleb swallowed hard, but his voice cracked into a whisper. "I never thought I'd have a real family." As if every wound from childhood, every lonely year, every night of scarcity and silence had returned at once and broken open in her arms. Amara held him. Caleb buried his face against her shoulder, his hand around her back, as though afraid she might disappear. In the faint tremble of his shoulders, Amara felt a different Caleb, deeper, softer, honest to the core. The news spread quietly through the ranch, not loud cheers, but a warm, simmering joy. Jake touched his hat to his chest. "Congratulations, Mrs. Callahan. I'm guessing the boy'll ride before he can walk." Miguel burst out laughing. "No, a girl, strong as Amara, I'm sure of it." Tommy, the youngest cowboy, sprinted to the barn, grabbed a piece of chalk, and started writing names on a saddle, then erased them, then wrote another, then erased again. "What are you doing?" Amara asked, hiding her smile. "Writing baby names for good luck," he said, deadly serious. "But you don't know if it's a boy or girl," she said. "That's why I wrote all of them." He turned the saddle. 10 scribbled names covered it. The whole ranch laughed. Horse hooves, wind through the rails, voices carrying. Everything blended into a day Amara knew she would remember forever. That afternoon, she returned to the house and found an envelope on the doorstep. The seal from Atlanta. The handwriting so familiar, her heart stalled. Marjorie, a friend once close as a sister, but also the one who stayed silent when the world turned its bastul back on her. She opened the letter. The voice of the past rose line by line. "Amara, I know I was wrong not to stand by you. I'm sorry. Atlanta is full of judgment, and I was a coward. If you can forgive me, I'd like to hear your voice again. If not, I understand. Marjorie." Amara sat on the bed. The letter was light, but its weight made her exhale long. Her past had been a wound, where she was looked at differently, judged, left alone on noisy streets. Now it returned, not to hurt her, but to ask how much she had grown. Caleb stepped in, seeing her holding the letter. "Bad news?" Amara shook her head. "Old news, arriving at the right time." Caleb sat beside her, his hand settling on her stomach, a habit he'd already formed. "You don't have to go back there," he said softly. "You have a home now." Amara rested her head on his shoulder. "I know, but some doors have to be closed by your own hand." Caleb tightened his grip on her hand. "I'll go with you, wherever that door leads." Outside, the evening wind carried the warm scent of grass and a soft neigh from the barn. A new day had begun, not loud, not dramatic, but enough to tell Amara that the life growing inside her was more than a child. It was a future, a beginning, a road she would not walk alone, for the first time in her life. Winter came earlier than any year before. By morning, the sky had turned the heavy iron gray of a blizzard gathering strength far off. Wind tore across the fence line, lifting white dust as fine as sea salt. Caleb heard the window panes rattling in the gusts, but what made him freeze wasn't the storm. It was Amara's voice calling his name from the bedroom. Short, sharp, like a knife edge. "Caleb, my water just broke." He rushed to her, hands shaking hard enough to slip on the bed frame. Amara lay on her side, pale, fighting to steady her breath. Each contraction seized her like a wave pulling tight from within. "The doctor," she whispered. "You have to go, now." Caleb looked to the window. Nothing but white. Wind rolled like surf. The road to Cheyenne, normally 3 hours, could turn into 6, or be impossible altogether. "No," he said, voice breaking. "I'm not leaving you alone in a storm." Amara caught his wrist, stronger than any words she could have chosen. "Caleb," she gasped, "I need the doctor. And Mrs. Price, I need you to be strong, the way you always are." That was enough. She believed in him, believed in a way that made something inside his chest pull tight. He pressed a quick kiss to her forehead, heavy as a vow. "I'll come back, even if the storm tears the road apart." Then he ran. Wind hit him like thrown gravel. Caleb leaned into the gusts, gripping the reins, glancing at the sky where the blizzard churned in thick, spinning sheets. The road blurred into a ghost trail, but he didn't stop. Every passing minute, he imagined Amara alone in the house, breathing through pain, not knowing whether help was coming. No, he wouldn't allow that. The horse slipped on the new snow. Caleb clenched his jaw, tightened his grip, pushed forward. Wind ripped at his coat. Ice cut his face like blades. But all he saw in his mind was Amara, her warm eyes, her hand on her belly. He would not fail her. When Cheyenne finally flickered through the white haze, Caleb nearly fell from the saddle. He pounded on the doctor's door until the hinges shook. "Doctor! Amara! Labor! Storm! Hurry!" Mrs. Price heard the shouting from her boarding room and rushed out, face draining, when Caleb explained. "Get me my coat," she said. "We leave now." The three of them wrapped themselves in heavy gear, climbed into the wagon, and plunged back into the white. The storm was worse than before. Wind slammed into the wagon as if trying to flip it. "Hold tight!" Caleb shouted, gripping the reins until his knuckles split. Back at the ranch, Amara clung to the bed frame, each contraction a crushing wave. Sweat beaded cold on her forehead. She heard the storm howl, the wood groan, but not Caleb. Old fears rose, loneliness, abandonment, the years she had been left standing alone against the world. But then, a soft knock came at the door. "Mrs. Callahan?" Tommy's voice trembled. "We're right here. We're not going anywhere." Amara burst into tears, knowing the ranch hands were sitting outside her door, loyal as firelight. The door blew open suddenly, wind and snow sweeping in. Caleb staggered in first, coated in frost. The doctor and Mrs. Price followed. The room changed instantly. Fear stepped back. Hope stepped forward. "You're doing so well, Amara," Caleb said, voice ragged. He took her hand, kissed the trembling fingers. "I'm here now." Another contraction crashed over her. Amara gritted her teeth, squeezing his hand. The storm screamed outside. Inside, a new breath prepared to arrive. Then, a cry, small, thin as a thread, yet strong enough to turn the whole world light. Amara sobbed before the baby did. Caleb's hand shook on her shoulder, as though he'd been pulled back from a sentence he'd feared all his life. Mrs. Price wrapped the child in a wool blanket. "A little girl," she whispered. "Healthy, beautiful, just like her mother." Caleb bent over her, staring at the tiny flushed face, the closed eyes. In a hushed voice, he said, "Eleanor Grace Callahan." Amara repeated it, a breath, a prayer. Eleanor. The ranch hands outside erupted in cheers. Fists on walls relieved laughter, wild whoops of joy. In the fiercest storm of a Wyoming winter, a new life entered the world. And in that moment, Amara knew she had not only brought a child into the storm, but a future. A circle made new, a family she once believed she could never claim. A year passed the way spring water moves along a creek bed, quietly, steadily, and yet when you looked back, everything had changed. Snow came and melted again. Fields turned green, then gold. Calves grew into cattle and were driven off in the clink of spurs and dust. Day after day, Callahan Ranch was no longer a place balanced on the edge of survival. It had become a home, an honest one. And Eleanor, in Amara's arms, grew a little more each day among wind, sunlight, and the laughter of the men working outside. That morning, Cheyenne lay under soft sunlight, but Caleb felt like he was walking into a storm. He led the horse, helped Amara and Eleanor onto the wagon, then took the reins with hands that had always been steady, hands that now trembled for the first time in years. "You all right?" Amara asked softly. Caleb nodded, but didn't look at her. "I never thought I'd live to see this day." Amara laid a hand on his shoulder. "We made it here because of you." Eleanor kicked her feet, smiling as if giving her father courage. The first bank of Cheyenne looked bigger than it ever had, maybe because Caleb's heartbeat was filling the whole world, making everything seem heavier. When they stepped inside, President Garrison rose at once. "Mr. Callahan," he said warmly, "I've been waiting for this." Caleb said nothing. He simply placed the bank draft on the table. Slow, deliberate, respectful. A full year's worth of saving, a good calving season, strong prices, long days under sun that burned straight through the shirt. Garrison checked the numbers, stamped the receipt, then opened a drawer and took out a bundle tied with a thin leather cord. "I'm honored to return this to you," he said, placing the deed in Caleb's hands. "From today on, Callahan Ranch belongs entirely to you. No loan, no lien, no threat hanging over it." Caleb stared at the paper, just a few lines of ink. But to him, it was a lifetime. "This," his voice cracked, "this is the first thing I've ever held that truly belonged to my family." His hand shook visibly. Amara stood beside him, holding Eleanor, watching her husband with a quiet, glowing pride. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Caleb turned to her, his expression softening, warmth rising behind his eyes. "We did it." Amara whispered, "We." She placed Eleanor in his arms. The baby reached up, grabbing his collar with tiny fingers, as if she sensed something important in the air. Caleb kissed her forehead. Then he kissed Amara's, slow, deep, a mark on the moment. Garrison cleared his throat, smiling. "You're home," he said, "in every sense of the word." On the way back, the wagon rolled over familiar roads, but today everything looked different. The fence line, the pasture, the barn, Each piece of it carried a new weight. Near the ranch, Caleb stopped the wagon on the high ridge overlooking the land. Amara frowned. "Why are we stopping?" He didn't answer at first. He stepped down, came around, and helped her off the wagon with a gentleness that said everything. Then he lifted Eleanor, and the three of them stood together on the hill. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Jake was repairing a fence. Miguel was leading cattle to the creek. Tommy was hanging bridle gear outside the barn, still singing off-key. Caleb's voice broke as he said quietly, This is the real home. Not because the mortgage is gone, but because you and our girl made it one." Amara leaned into him. "I only followed my heart, and it has always pointed toward you." Caleb looked at her, a look that made even the wind pause. Then he laid a hand on her stomach, a gesture born from months of instinct before Eleanor was born. "I want this place to be a legacy," he whispered. "For Eleanor, for whatever comes after." Amara squeezed his hand. "We'll build it, season by season, storm by storm, hope by hope." Caleb pressed a trembling kiss to the corner of her eye, warm, carrying the scent of wind and Wyoming soil. Eleanor giggled, as if sealing the promise. Under the soft light of late afternoon, the three of them stood together, their shadows stretching toward the horizon. They had the ranch. They had each other. They had a future. And for the first time in her life, Amara felt not just accepted, but truly, wholly at home. Another year slipped by, quiet in the way Wyoming seasons always are. Day by day, nothing seemed to change. Yet when you turned around, everything was different. Callahan Ranch entered the most prosperous stretch it had ever known. The herd doubled. Calving season was kind. The roof was repaired, new fences went up, and the eastern pasture expanded by a few more acres when the old neighbor moved to Nebraska. But the biggest change wasn't in the land. It was in the sound of a child's laughter filling the yard. Eleanor, almost 2, toddled between the barns chasing Jake's rescued tabby. Her round cheeks and tiny curls made even the toughest ranch hand grin. One morning, Caleb was hammering a plank back into place while Amara sat nearby with her ledger. He slowed, watching her longer than he meant to. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Amara lifted her gaze, smiling. "I'm drafting a plan. For a school." Caleb blinked. "A school? Here?" "A small one. For our child. For Jake's future kids, Miguel's, Tommy's, and any little one who needs a place to learn." She held up the paper, steady handwriting, tidy lists, material estimates, timelines. Caleb braced a hand on his knee, looking at her like he was seeing a miracle. "You think we can actually pull that off? We survived a blizzard, a railroad war, a mortgage that nearly broke us." Her smile warmed like sunlight. "You think a little classroom can stop us?" Caleb laughed, leaning in to kiss the top of her head. "Nothing stops you." The schoolhouse rose by late summer, a small wooden building with wide windows, a blackboard Caleb built himself, and long pine benches. Simple but beautiful in its own way. On the first morning, Eleanor sat at her tiny desk. Amara stood in the doorway holding her lesson book, eyes stinging. Caleb came behind her, sliding his arms around her waist. "You turned this ranch into something I never dared to imagine." She leaned into him. "We did it. Together." That autumn evening, Amara sat under lamplight, writing a letter to Marjorie, her old friend from Atlanta. They had exchanged a few notes over the past year, but one thing still rested quiet in her chest. Dear Marjorie, life has turns we never see coming. I came west, searching for a marriage, for shelter. But what I found was myself. I learned to trust my own hands, this land, the promise of tomorrow, and the man who saw strength in me long before I knew it was there. My life is full now, imperfect, difficult, honest, and worth every step. I hope you find something just as true, in your own way. Amara. She folded the letter just as Caleb stepped in, Eleanor in his arms, his hair mussed from a long day outside. Our school teacher finished her writing? He teased. Amara kissed Eleanor's cheek and smirked at him. Finished, but you brought half the field in with you. Probably, he chuckled. Come outside. The sunset's too, pretty to miss. Callahan Ridge looked like a painting brushed by heaven, gold, violet, and orange melting into each other across the horizon. The breeze carried the scent of ripe grain and pine. Amara leaned on the railing. Caleb wrapped his arms around her from behind, holding Eleanor snug between them, the child resting her head against her mother's chest. For a while nobody spoke, only light, only wind, only the sound of three hearts settling into the same rhythm. Amara, Caleb said quietly, voice low as earth. I don't know what I ever did to deserve you, but I'm grateful every single day that I found you. Amara placed her hand over his. I once thought I came here to find a husband, she whispered, her voice sinking into the sunset. But what I found was myself. Caleb kissed her forehead. Eleanor squeaked in her sleep, making them both laugh softly. The plains held them in a gentle glow, the softest light the West ever offered. A family, a home, a life they had fought hard to build and keep. And in that moment, Amara knew. Her heart, no matter where life might lead, had chosen this place long ago. Thank you for staying with this story to the end. If it warmed your heart, I invite you to leave a small comment below so I know these Wild West love stories still reach the hearts of those who've lived through many seasons of life. If you'd like to support the channel, please like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Thank you, truly.